When Louise Hunt broke up with her boyfriend in June of 2024, he responded with kind words, thanking her for the time they had together and wishing her the best. To her, it was a relief, and she began her new single life without worry. Unfortunately, those messages were only a mask hiding the rage that would only take 13 days to boil over into murder. This is Monsters. Kyle Clifford was born on April 5, 1998 in Enfield, North London, England. He was one of 4 children born to Richard and Diane Clifford. Neighbors later described the Clifford household as quote-unquote lovely. One said Richard was very helpful in the neighborhood and would offer to cut her grass. It seemed that there must have been some kind of abuse behind closed doors, though, because Kyle would not be the first of their sons to become a murderer. In 2017, their oldest son, Bradley Clifford, ran someone down with his car and was sent to prison. He drove a red Mustang, and people said it was the most important thing in the world to him. Well, one day he was driving when 19-year-old Joshua Francis pulled up next to him on a moped with 18-year-old Siobhan Khan as a passenger. Supposedly, Siobhan threw a bottle at his beloved car, so Bradley, driving drunk of course, chased them down, going the wrong way on the road to do so, and plowed into them with his car. The 2 men on the moped flew through the air. Joshua was fairly unharmed, but Siobhan suffered serious injuries. But that wasn't enough for Bradley. He exited his vehicle and began beating the fatally injured passenger. Siobhan died from his wounds and Bradley was sentenced to life in prison. You might wonder why Siobhan threw a bottle at Bradley's car, but I couldn't find any information. Based on Bradley's known personality and the fact that he was drunk behind the wheel, he likely cut the moped off. That's only speculation, though. Could the victim have thrown a bottle at the Mustang for no apparent reason? Sure. Is it likely? Not at all. It's unclear where their beliefs came from, but Kyle and Bradley were known to easily become violent. With Kyle, racism and misogyny played a large part in that behavior, and it might have with Bradley. I just don't have any details to back that up. And Kyle seemed to be close with his brother because it was reported that he visited Bradley in prison every 2 weeks. In 2019, Kyle joined the British Army and was in the Queen's Dragoon Guard. He was a trooper, which is an entry-level rank equivalent to private in the U.S. Army. Also known as the Welsh Cavalry, the unit specializes in armored reconnaissance, combined arms, counterinsurgency in desert terrain, desert warfare, counter-sniper tactics, and special reconnaissance. Kyle was in the service for a little over 2 years before dropping out. He did not see active combat and was considered to be a problematic soldier. He got into multiple bar fights while in the service and was considered immature. A soldier in basic training with him said, quote, when he joined the army he was immature for his age and had a bit of a chip on his shoulder. A commanding officer described him as, quote, wholly unsuited to military employment, and found him to be, quote, poorly trained, lacking in motivation, and unwilling to commit to soldiering. Another report mentioned he, quote, struggled to grasp basic military concepts. It was reported that he spent 286 days off duty, claiming to be sick. Based on his time in service, he spent 35 to 40% of his time in the British Army playing hooky from actual duty. When he left in 2022, he started working menial jobs before starting work at a fire and security installation company called Amthol in February of 2023. He left after only 5 months and started working as a security guard for Reynolds Food Group, a fresh food supplier. It was around that time that Kyle met Louise online. Louise Hunt was 24 years old when she matched with Kyle online. Louise was the youngest of 3 daughters born to John and Carol Hunt. Her father, John, was well known as a racing commentator for the BBC. Her eldest sister, Amy, had moved out of the house while Louise and the middle sister, Hannah, still lived at home. Louise ran a dog grooming business, Groom and Glow, out of a pod in their garden, while Hannah worked as a beautician. Kyle and Louise started chatting online, eventually moving to video calls and finally an in-person date. It's said that they hit it off immediately and quickly became inseparable. The media has portrayed Kyle as abusive and misogynistic, which is true, but John would later say that it wasn't like he was that way in front of them. They never really liked him. Like his commanders in the army, they too felt he was immature and self-centered. He said they never saw him being outwardly abusive to his daughter. It was only later that he saw text messages where he would belittle her and subtly manipulate her. Kyle was not so quiet about his misogyny at work, though. He was eventually let go from his position at Reynolds, and his employer said that they had received complaints from other employees about Kyle's sexualized comments. His co-workers would join the growing list of people who would go on to say that Kyle was immature for his age. On June 22, 2024, Kyle took Louise to a friend's wedding in Scarborough, which is about 4.5 hours north of London, so they stayed in a rental. While there, it seems that Louise had trouble using the oven, and the next day at the wedding, John made a point of bringing it up to everyone they talked to. He would tell people she didn't know how to use an oven or that she couldn't cook. One person said they asked Louise what she did for a living, and Kyle quickly said, quote, "One thing she doesn't do is know how to work an oven properly." So it's easy to see why so many people considered him immature, and why, after the wedding, Louise was no longer interested in being with him. The day after they returned home from the wedding, Louise texted Kyle telling him they needed to talk and explaining that she felt belittled while they were there. It should be no surprise that Kyle took no responsibility for his actions and attempted to manipulate her into being the one who was being unreasonable. When it became clear that Louise wanted to end things, Kyle began texting her about how he thought she was the one and that whatever force had brought them together would be disappointed that they didn't stay together. That was a way to make Louise feel like the bad guy for breaking up with him, which she ended up doing. After meeting in person and talking through some details of their relationship, Louise ended things the next day, and their final communication seemed amicable. Louise wrote, quote, "Good morning. Hope you're doing okay this morning. I'm sorry, Kyle, but I can't continue with what we have. I feel like it's been broken and I can't ignore how I've been feeling or made to feel in our relationship over the course of the year. I don't know that in the future, if we both do the work on ourselves, this could be something amazing, but I just feel right now I owe it to myself to take some space and walk away from my own sanity and health. Thank you for the incredible time we've had this year. I hope you know how much I love you and still will for a long time. I never want there to be anything nasty between us ever. Take care of yourself always, please." A little while later, Kyle responded, quote, "Thank you for the clarity, Louise, so we can both start our healing process. I love you so much and will for a very long time. I will always be here for you if you ever need me. Please don't hesitate. I wish you all the best and take care of yourself too." Louise continued her life, disappointed in the breakup, but comfortable that things had ended on friendly terms. She continued working at her business and spending time with her family with no reason to fear for her life. It's common for people to forget why they broke up with someone and allow themselves to reignite the relationship. So Louise made a note for herself on her phone that was titled, "When You're Sad, Look." The note had the reasons she had left Kyle and listed a number of negative qualities, such as banning her from wearing makeup, dictating her clothing, and forbidding her from going out with him. The fact that he talked about his brother Bradley, who was serving a life sentence for murder, and noting that Kyle continued to visit him regularly, but never acknowledged his brother's crimes were horrendous. She listed his racist comments, negative remarks about transgender people, and frequent road rage. She described his belittling language, his claim to have a higher IQ than her family, and his amusement regarding violent acts committed by his own family members. The court would hear that Louise described the relationship as, quote, sucking the life out of me. The note was written 5 days before the murders. Kyle's polite response was completely fake. He immediately started to plan his revenge against Louise. The breakup happened on June 26, 2024, and 2 days later, on the 28th, Kyle purchased a rope from a tool station. Now, it's been reported in multiple sources that he bought 30 centimeters of rope, which is pretty short. That would be less than a foot. But in the surveillance video of him at the tool station, he's got a spool of rope that's clearly longer than that. So I'm assuming he bought 30 meters. A couple of days after that, he started looking for crossbows online while also viewing porn. On July 1st, he talked to his brother on the phone, which was recorded, and reports say he talked to Bradley about crossbows and a Japanese sword, but he never mentioned a plan to hurt anyone. 2 days later, he purchased a Cornet MXT 405 crossbow, 6 bolts, and a rope device that's used to help cock the crossbow online. Bolts are the arrows that are used in a crossbow. The MXT 405 has a 175-pound draw weight, and bolts shoot at 405 feet per second, which is extremely lethal for a human at close range. The same day, Kyle also purchased a Glock air pistol, but it wouldn't be delivered by the time of the murders. On July 4th, Kyle bought 2 fuel containers from Halford's, an auto repair chain, then some duct tape at a B&Q, a home improvement store. It's unclear when he made the purchase, but on July 7th, a 10-inch butcher knife that he had ordered on Amazon was delivered to his house. It's not explicitly stated anywhere, but sometime around then, the crossbow would have been delivered to his house as well. Kyle's activities the following day, July 8th, would become important when it came to sentencing. The judge didn't want it to influence the trial, but once Kyle was convicted, he said it was an important detail about Kyle's mental state. Kyle spent the day before the murder searching for Andrew Tate videos, who the judge labeled, quote, the poster boy for misogynists. That's not something that can be argued, as Tate himself has claimed to be one. And in my opinion, which I'm never going to stop giving here on my YouTube channel, people like him are some of the weakest people in the world emotionally. If you need to believe that other people are inferior to you just based on one aspect of them that they can't control, their gender, skin color, etc., it's only because you haven't learned how to cope with your own insecurities. Bullies, which is all Tate is, only push other people down to feel better by comparison. That's easier than learning how to lift themselves up. So they become toxic people who emanate negativity, and if they're famous, their rhetoric can turn fragile men into predators. It's believed that Kyle used Andrew Tate as a way to pump himself up for what he was about to do, to reinforce that his plan was justified. The next day, July 9th, Kyle carried out that plan. At just before 10 a.m., Kyle went to the Garden Club, a membership-only gardening supply store in Enfield, with his mother, father, and niece. He can be seen on surveillance pushing his niece in a stroller. A little before noon, Kyle sent a text message to a woman he had been dating since before Louise broke up with him. It was later revealed that he had been seeing another woman while he was with Louise as well. At 1:07 p.m., he left his home in Enfield and drove to Bushy, parking near the Hunt family home 30 minutes later. Police believe he walked toward the Hunt home to see which cars were parked outside. Then he returned to his car and searched on his phone for horse racing today. It's believed that he wanted to make sure John wouldn't be home. John would later say that he believed that Kyle also wanted to kill him, but I think Kyle was too much of a coward to face someone who would have actually been able to fight back. Kyle moved his car so it was parked closer to the house, took a rucksack from the trunk, which is believed to have contained the knife, and carried a white plastic bag containing Louise's clothes. At 2:32 p.m., he knocked on the door, and when Carol answered, he claimed he wanted to drop off some of Louise's belongings and leave a thank you card for her and John. Almost immediately upon being led into the house, he attacked Carol with the knife, stabbing her 4 to 8 times, with her screams being caught on the doorbell camera outside. At just after 3 p.m., Kyle returned to his car to get the crossbow, which was hidden under a blanket before returning to the house. Louise had been working in her dog grooming business in a pod in the garden, so she had no idea what had been happening inside the home. At 4:12 p.m., she entered the house where Kyle was waiting. He restrained her with duct tape, gagged her, and raped her. It was part of his Tate-infused toxic belief that women owed him and their sole purpose was for sex. He then used Louise's phone to send a text message to her father asking what time he would be home, and he replied to say it would be late. He was making sure he wouldn't be home soon, which reinforces the theory that he didn't want him there. At 5:57 p.m., Louise's phone was used to search whether unplugging a smoke detector stops it from sounding an alarm and if alcohol is flammable. It's believed he was planning to set the house on fire to cover evidence, but he didn't end up doing that. At 6:50 p.m., Kyle killed Louise with the crossbow moments before her sister Hannah returned home. Only 4 minutes later, Hannah was shot with the crossbow before he fled the house. Hannah didn't die immediately and was able to send a text to her boyfriend saying that she had been attacked and asking him to call the police. After that, she was able to dial 999 and give her address. She was also able to name the person who had attacked her and her family. At 7:10 p.m., emergency services arrived at the house, but Hannah died soon after. Kyle had fled the home with the crossbow under a blanket. He drove back to Enfield, where he parked his car on the opposite side of a cemetery from his home. About 24 hours later, police found Kyle in the cemetery, and as they approached, he pointed the crossbow at himself and fired a bolt into his chest. Also in the cemetery, police found a noose made from the rope he had purchased by a tree, but there was no sign that he had tried to use it. It's also noted that Kyle sat in the cemetery for almost a day and only shot himself with the crossbow when help was nearby, causing many to believe he did not actually want to die. Kyle was rushed to the hospital where he survived his wound but was left paralyzed from the waist down. After being released from the hospital, he was charged with 3 counts of premeditated murder, 1 count of false imprisonment, 2 counts of possessing an offensive weapon, and 1 count of rape. He was also interviewed by the police.
The next note is addressed to myself. I don't want to live my life without her. I don't want to experience new things. Nothing I can think of can make me happy. I know I could have gone to therapy, found faith, and become a new, better person, but I just simply don't want to. I'm so sorry I didn't wait to move on and find my future wife, have the children I always wanted. What do you mean by that?
No comment.
Explain to me why you decided to deprive Hannah and Louise of that privilege.
No comment.
What gave you the right to do that?
No comment.
What gave you the right to deprive Carol of seeing her future grandchildren?
No comment.
It's a very self-centered note and doesn't take into account anybody else. Do you agree with that?
No comment.
There's no apology to the Hunt family, is there?
No comment.
The only apology is to yourself. Do you feel that these are quite self-centered words?
No comment.
Why didn't you seek help, Kyle?
No comment.
You couldn't be bothered, is what the letter suggests. Am I wrong?
No comment.
You don't want to live your life without her. Explain that.
No comment.
But of course, you sit here in front of us and she's dead. Tell me how this has happened.
No comment.
Is your intention to make people feel sorry for you writing these letters?
No comment.
Look at your behaviour. Look how calmly and nonchalantly you walk away from that house. You've just killed 3 people and you stroll away like you're going down the shops.
He basically said no comment to most of the questions asked. He eventually admitted to most of the crimes, pleading guilty to all of the charges beside the rape charge. He went to trial and claimed that the DNA found inside of Louise was from consensual sex they had on June 23rd, 16 days prior to the murders. Get the fuck out of here. Experts testify that it was extremely unlikely, which was them being professional because the claim was ridiculous. Kyle Clifford was found guilty of the rape, and his sentencing would include that conviction along with the 7 other charges. At sentencing, the judge had some choice words for the defendant.
Kyle Clifford, on the 9th of July last year, you went to the home of your former girlfriend, Louise Hunt, and launched a murderous attack on her and her family. You first killed her mother, Carol, who even on that day showed you nothing but kindness in the moments before you attacked her. You raped and killed Louise, who had been as gentle as she could in ending her relationship with you after your arrogance and anger proved too much for her to stand. Then you murdered Hannah Hunt, who had done nothing to harm you save supporting her little sister. The evidence I have heard shows you to be a jealous man, soaked in self-pity, a man who holds women in utter contempt. This is no occasion to subject the family and friends of your victims to any delay or suspense. I therefore make clear at once that for each of these 3 murders, the sentence will be one of life imprisonment with a whole life order. That means a sentence from which you will never be released.
Kyle Clifford was sentenced to life in prison without parole, what's called a whole life order in the UK. He was also sentenced to an additional 20 years for the rape, 8 years for false imprisonment, and 1 year each for the 2 convictions for possession of an offensive weapon, the crossbow and the knife. Kyle will not only spend the rest of his life behind bars, but he will also spend it in a wheelchair. There's no information on whether or not Bradley Clifford will ever be released, so now the Cliffords have 2 murderers wasting away in prison because they couldn't control their anger. How do 50% of your offspring become convicted murderers? There isn't much information about the other 2 Clifford siblings, which would suggest they haven't been in trouble. How do different people experience the same upbringing and end up on opposite sides of the criminal justice system? It's a curiosity that got me into true crime in the first place, but I've never found a solid answer. Why did my grandfather become a horrible, abusive person when he came from what has been described as a good, respected family? And why did my father follow in his footsteps, but then I didn't? Unfortunately, we aren't able to predict who will grow up to be a good, productive member of society and who will turn into a monster. Thanks for watching This Is Monsters. New episodes are uploaded twice a week on Mondays and Thursdays. There are occasional bonus episodes covering unsolved cases and criminal history. If you have a suggestion for a case you think I should cover, leave it in the comments. You can always follow the channel on Instagram at thisis_monsters and purchase merch at thisismonsters.com. Thanks so much, and be safe.